The breakfast cart stopped outside the tier, but no hands reached out for trays. Metal doors stayed quiet. Dozens of men stood at their cell windows, eyes level, waiting. "Meals," an officer shouted. No one moved. The officer slammed a slot open. The tray sat there untouched, oatmeal cooling, milk sweating. 2 more slots, same thing. The radio crackled. "Control, we've got refusals in C-section." A second voice answered, tight and sharp, "Not refusals. It's a hunger strike." Down the row, a timer beeped from a medic's belt. In the third cell, a thin man named Daniel leaned on his wall, lips dry, hands shaking a little. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. Across from him, Marcus stared straight ahead and said nothing. On the far end, young Nate pressed his palm to the glass, as if he could steady the whole block with that one small touch. Then the loudspeaker boomed, "All inmates are ordered to accept state meals. Failure to comply will result in disciplinary action." The words echoed off concrete. No one took a tray. "Count it," the sergeant said. Officers went cell by cell, marking clipboards. Refused. 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 In minutes, the total ran past 20, then 40, then the whole unit. On camera screens in the control booth, the tier looked frozen. But inside each cell, something burned, quiet, hot, and set with purpose. It wasn't about food. It was about being heard. A medic knelt by Daniel's door. "How many hours?" she asked. 48, he whispered. "Water?" "Sips." She checked his pulse through the slot, brow pinched. "You need fluids." Daniel shook his head once. The medic looked up at the sergeant. He nodded, jaw tight. The cart rolled on. How did it start? 2 weeks earlier, the yard felt like a held breath. Men walked the track in slow circles under a sky the color of steel. Pelican Bay Security Housing Unit, SHU, meant 23 hours a day alone, 1 hour. In a small pen of concrete and sky. Letters crawled through the system. Visits were rare. Days stacked like bricks. Some men had been in isolation for years. Then came the first kite, a tiny note folded tight and passed legally in the law library as part of a public statement already mailed to the outside. It listed demands anyone could read: meaningful review to get out of solitary, better medical care, fairer rules about gang validation. No secret codes. No threats. Just plain words and names signed at the bottom. A second letter followed, from men in different pods, echoing the same message. "We will refuse state meals," it said, "until there is change." Marcus read both letters twice. He had rules: stay calm, stay small, survive. But the words would not leave him. "How long?" he asked Nate. "Until they hear us," Nate answered. "What if they don't?" Marcus asked. Nate looked at the floor. "Then we keep going." The first day of the strike felt like a dare. Trays slid in and sat untouched. Officers wrote reports. The intercom repeated policy lines. Nothing moved, but everything changed. By evening, rumor said other units were joining. By morning, word said other prisons were watching. The strike did not roar like a riot. It spread like cold, steady, everywhere. Meals came. Meals went. Water cups clinked. Men rested more to save strength. Some prayed. Some stared at the tiny window and counted the lines in the wire. In the SHU, you learn to fold time until it fits in your hand like a coin. Now they stacked hours like proof. On day 2, the warden held a meeting. "We will document all refusals," he said. "Offer medical checks. Keep order. No negotiations under pressure." In the control room, Officer Caldwell rubbed his eyes and watched the monitors. He had worked riots, fights, yard surges. This was different: no shouting, no smoke, only stillness that felt louder. Then sirens. A chaplain walked the tier. "You can stop," he said softly at each door. "You've made your point. Nate asked, "Did anyone outside hear us?" The chaplain hesitated. "Some people did," he said. "News called. Lawyers called. That doesn't mean today changes." Nate swallowed. "But it means someone's listening," he said. The chaplain nodded. "Maybe." By late afternoon, the first man broke. He took a tray, hands shaking, tears bright at the corners of his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said to no one and everyone. No one answered. There were no labels today. No traitors. No heroes. Just human bodies facing a long night. Daniel did not take the tray. His head ached. The room sounded like it was underwater. He lay flat, watched the light crawl across the ceiling, and thought about his mother's kitchen, the steam from rice, the scratch of a chair on tile, the way the house held warmth. He blinked and the cell was back, hard and cold. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Hold." On day 3, medical checks moved faster. Blood pressure cuffs. Finger sticks. Questions asked through steel. Nausea? Dizziness? Chest pain? A little. A lot. "I'm fine." Caldwell watched the medic team and felt something knot in his chest. He didn't want anyone dying on his tier. He wanted the count clear, the doors quiet, the reports dull. He wanted the job to be boring. Outside the prison, news trickled slow but steady. An advocacy group posted a statement, "Hunger strike at Pelican Bay, prisoners call for change." A state official said on camera, "Policy is policy." A former officer wrote an op-ed, "Listen before you lose them." Families called the prison and were told, "Your loved one is stable." The word stable covered too much. That evening, the fog rolled in thicker than usual. It wrapped the fences and pressed against the glass slit of each door. Marcus stood, dizzy, and braced a palm on the wall. N8 slid a paper cup of water through the gap where his cuff port met the door. "Sip slow," he said. Marcus took a careful mouthful and nodded thanks. The sergeant returned with the breakfast cart earlier than normal, pushing hard, face set. "Last call," he said, loud enough for the cameras. Trays slid. Trays sat. He tried the script again, "This is your opportunity to comply." Silence, then, halfway down the tier, a body hit concrete. The medic was already moving. Caldwell called it in. "Man down, C-section." Doors stayed closed, policy said they must. In cell 319, Daniel had slumped from his bunk and lay curled, breathing short, fingers twitching. The medic opened the slot, talking calm. "Daniel, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand." No response. She checked his pulse, eyes sharp. "He needs a bed now." The sergeant keyed his radio. No movement during lockdown. The medic shot him a look that could cut steel. "He doesn't make it to the afternoon if he stays on that floor." The sergeant hesitated one beat too long, then the tier changed shape, hands pressed to windows. One voice, then another, "Help him." It wasn't a shout. It was a chorus. Caldwell felt the hair rise on his arms. Hunger strikes were supposed to be quiet. Quiet was how they survived. But a line had been crossed, the room itself knew it. The warden arrived fast, coat damp with fog. He looked through the glass, then at the medic, then at the sergeant. "Move him," he said. The lock buzzed. Officers worked the rattle chain, opened the cuff port, slid restraints, eased the door, all by the book but faster than the book liked. They lifted Daniel onto a gurney. His head lolled. His lips were gray as they rolled him toward the sally port. Daniel's eyes fluttered. He tried to speak. The medic bent close. "What is it?" she asked. His voice was a thread. "Don't let it be for nothing." The gurney disappeared into the corridor. The door thudded shut. The tier fell back into stillness, but it wasn't the same stillness. Something had stepped over a line and could not step back. The chaplain returned, eyes wet, and stood between two cells. Please, he said, eat. No one answered. Marcus stared at the tray and thought of the words in the letters, we refuse until change. Nate whispered through the seam, we hold. Then the loudspeaker clicked, and a new voice filled the block, cool, official, careful. Effective immediately, the department will review conditions in the security housing unit. Representatives will be assigned. This is not a negotiation. A pause. Paper rustled. Medical intervention protocols may be used if necessary. The last line hung in the air like a weight. Caldwell closed his eyes. He knew what those protocols meant. Tubes. Restraints. More reports. The officer with the cart started forward again, a single tray balanced at the front. He stopped at Marcus's door and waited. The whole tier watched without looking. Marcus felt his legs tremble and planted his feet harder. He reached for the slot, his fingertips touched steel, and from the far end of the tier, where the fog pressed darkest against the glass, a voice rose, thin but steady, speaking words that turned every head and froze the officer's hand in the air. Day 4 starts now. The news spread fast, first through whispers in the medical wing, then in slow-motion waves across the prison. Daniel was alive, but barely. The officers who carried him out said his heart stopped once on the gurney. Word was, they brought him back in the infirmary. Whether that was true or not didn't matter. To the men in the SHU, he had crossed a line between silence and sacrifice. Marcus sat on his bunk, the tray still untouched beside him. The oatmeal had dried to crust, milk souring in its carton. He hadn't eaten in 4 days. His stomach no longer growled, it felt hollow, clean, as if it had forgotten hunger. But his mind was a storm. Every sound echoed, the hum of L.I.'s, the drip from a pipe, the distant clang of doors. Each one sounded like a countdown. Nate's voice came through the vent, soft but steady. They moved Daniel to medical. They say he's breathing again. Marcus nodded even though no one could see him. Good. You think they'll listen now? Marcus let out a dry laugh. They'll listen, but only to find a way to stop us. Outside the SHU, the world had started watching. News vans parked by the outer gate. Reporters shouted questions at stone-faced officials. Families of inmates stood in clusters holding signs, "End solitary now. Treat them like humans." A few officers, off-duty and still in uniform, watched from their cars. Some looked angry. Some just looked tired. Inside, exhaustion took over. On day 5, half the strikers could barely stand. One man tried to walk his cell to stay awake and fainted mid-step. The medics worked around the clock, checking vitals through slots, writing reports, offering IVs. Some men refused. Others took them, then went right back to fasting. That night, Marcus dreamed he was back in the yard, the real yard, not the tiny dog run they called recreation. He saw open sky, heard laughter, smelled dirt and sweat. Then the dream broke like glass. The ceiling light flickered. He woke to the hiss of an intercom. All inmates, prepare for inspection. It wasn't a normal inspection. Boots echoed louder, radios busier, more officers than usual. Caldwell led the line, helmeted, tense. They stopped at every door, watching, waiting for someone to snap. But the tier stayed silent. That silence scared the administration more than any riot could. When they reached Marcus's door, Caldwell hesitated. "You need to eat," he said quietly. "You're not built to win this." Marcus met his eyes through the small square of glass. "Maybe not," he said. "But you're built to stop hearing us." Caldwell didn't swear. He just wrote something on his clipboard and moved on. By day 7, the hunger strike had spread to other prisons, Corcoran, Tehachapi, even Folsom. Thousands of men had joined, refusing meals in solidarity. The Department of Corrections called it coordinated misconduct. Lawyers called it civil resistance. On the evening news, an anchor read the story with a raised eyebrow. Inmates across California are refusing food to protest long-term solitary confinement. Officials say the situation is under control. Under control. That phrase played in Marcus's mind all night. The next morning, officers dragged in 2 large crates, one with bottled water, the other with liquid nutrition packs. Force-feeding authorization came through, the sergeant said. Medical orders. Not negotiable. The air went cold. Caldwell unlocked the first door. Cooperate, he warned, or they'll do it the hard way. The medic stepped in, gentle hands, but eyes full of sorrow. Marcus could hear the suction hiss of the feeding tube from 3 cells away. The sound was worse than any scream. It meant control had shifted back to the state. The strike had reached its peak, Nate whispered through the vent that night. They're going to break us, man. Marcus closed his eyes. No, he said. We already made them see. That's what scares them. And he was right. The next day, a statement appeared on every news site in California. It was short, written in bureaucratic calm, but it was the first of its kind. The Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation will begin a review of security housing unit policies, including placement criteria and length of stay. Discussions with inmate representatives are under consideration. Inside Pelican Bay, the tier lights burned brighter that night. For the first time in years, men who hadn't spoken across cells started talking again. They talked about letters, families, and the world outside the concrete. They talk. Ed about hope, something the prison was never built to hold, but then, just before midnight, an alarm blared. Caldwell ran to the control booth. The monitor screens flickered red. Medical emergency, B-section, the radio screamed. Inmate unresponsive. Marcus froze. Who? He shouted, pounding on his door. No answer. Then Nate's voice, faint but clear through the vent. It's Daniel. They said he never made it out. The hallway lights turned blood orange. Officers rushed past. The fog outside pressed against the window like a living thing. The hunger strike had forced the system to listen, but it had cost them a voice. Marcus sat back on his bunk, hands shaking, heart numb. He looked at the untouched tray beside him. The food had gone cold. The spoon gleamed under the fluorescent light. He reached out slowly, his fingers hovering over it, then stopped. Outside, a helicopter circle cut through the fog, searchlights scanning the compound, slicing through darkness, and in that hum of blades and silence, Marcus whispered the words that every man in that tier could feel but none dared to say aloud. Maybe this is how change begins. The smell of disinfectant hung in the air, sharp and heavy, mixing with something deeper, silence. After weeks of chaos, Pelican Bay was quiet again. But it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm, when the damage is still fresh, and no one knows what comes next. Marcus sat on his bunk, his ribs visible beneath his pale skin. He hadn't eaten properly in over 3 weeks. The hunger strike had changed him, not just physically, but deep inside. He'd watched friends collapse, heard the whispers through the vents, and felt the world outside finally start to listen. The warden's voice echoed over the intercom that morning. Feeding resumed. Medical evaluations mandatory. Movement restricted. It was cold, Lee. Nothing had happened. But something had happened, something that would echo far beyond these walls. Days later, the first letters began arriving. Envelopes slid under the heavy steel doors, from lawyers, families, and even journalists. They spoke of outrage, investigations, lawsuits. The strike that began in silence had made its way into headlines and courtrooms. For the first time in years, the men inside Pelican Bay had been heard. Through the food slots, whispers carried like prayers. They're talking about us in Sacramento. Governor's office wants reports. Lawyers filed a case, Ashker versus governor. Marcus didn't fully understand what that meant yet, but he could feel something shifting. The guards were quieter, the searches more careful. Even the sergeants who once barked orders now spoke in clipped tones. Everyone knew the spotlight was on Pelican Bay, but not everyone welcomed it. Some officers saw the lawsuits as betrayal. One night, as Marcus was lying on his bunk, a loud metallic clang echoed through the tier, the sound of a baton slamming against the bars. You think you won, huh? A guard growled from the shadows. The world forgets fast. Marcus didn't respond. He'd learned that silence could be more powerful than shouting. Weeks turned into months. Court filings grew thicker, and lawyers pressed for an end to indefinite solitary confinement. Outside, families marched with signs, "End the torture. We are human too." The world was finally seeing Pelican Bay, not as a fortress of control, but as a symbol of brokenness. Inside, the hunger strikers became both legends and warnings. Some were transferred, others released to general population, and a few never recovered from the toll it took. But something new had been born in their place. Unity Point. One morning, Marcus woke to the sound of the steel door buzzing open. A correctional officer, younger than most, stood there with a clipboard. "Pack your stuff," he said. Marcus blinked. "Transfer. General population," the guard replied. "You're out of SHU." For a moment, Marcus didn't move. After years of concrete, silence, and light that never turned off, the thought of seeing other faces, real faces, felt unreal. He gathered his few belongings, letters, a Bible, a worn-out pencil stub. As he stepped into the hallway, he glanced back one last time. The cell was empty now, but the air felt heavy, like it still carried the echoes of every voice that had refused to eat. Outside the SHU, sunlight hit his face for the first time in years. He squinted, feeling warmth instead of the cold hum of fluorescent bulbs. Far away, the lawsuit that began with a strike in a forgotten cell was gaining momentum. By 2015, it would force California to agree to major reforms, reducing the use of solitary confinement and transferring hundreds out of isolation. But in that moment, standing in the yard, Marcus didn't know the full story yet. He just felt the weight lift, not completely, but enough to breathe again, and as the wind carried the faint sound of another steel door closing, he thought of Daniel, the man who hadn't made it, whose name had started it all. He whispered softly, "We did it, brother." Then he turned toward the horizon, still fenced, still guarded, but brighter than before. The hunger strike was over, but its echo had only just begun.